And for more on this, we're now joined by Daniel Al-Naddaf. He is from Equal Education Law Centre, and he joins us now via our video link. Daniel, thank you so much for your time this evening here on SABC News. Maybe first let's start off with getting your thoughts when it comes to the medium-term budget, particularly when it comes to money set aside for education.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Mbali. I suppose the first thing to say is, a general take on the MTBPS that there's very little information that is either promising or even, particularly worrying when it comes to education, and that itself is a concern. We haven't seen any indication of the gender responsive budgeting that was supposed to be included in the budget in the MTBPS this year. That obviously has a significant effect on socioeconomic rights, including education. We saw very little to no information on early childhood development, which had been signaled in the actual budget earlier this year as a key priority for the state, but had almost no mention in the budget and certainly no increased allocations. And in terms of education, the only increases were firstly for the Western Cape for a rapid school build program, which had already actually been announced in the budget, and some additional money for things like disaster response and a small rollover in the Eastern Cape. So yeah, general takeaway I'd say is not particularly promising.
And what do you make of this incentive which has been given or granted by the Minister of Finance when it comes to early retirement of some teachers? Do you think that it has the potential to save even more jobs in the teaching space?
No, in short, no. So the thing with any early retirement incentive is that economically, those are generally used in markets which are saturated. And one example might be in, for example, as I think is the implication in this case, in a bloated civil service. And there certainly are sectors of the public service or the civil service that are bloated, and where this may be a useful, lever. The reality is that in the education sector, it's diametrically the opposite situation. The Department of Higher Education and Training at the time, their own research suggests that 40 to 50% of current teachers will be retiring by the year 2030. And that's why we've already seen in many provinces, teachers being asked to actually either defer their retirement or come back out of retirement because we have such a shortage. And as you've mentioned at the beginning of the story, we're in a context where firstly the Western Cape is announcing about 2,400 contract posts being cut, but we're also very likely to see other provinces announce the same, if not worse. In fact, the only reason we've been discussing the Western Cape for the time being is because it's the only province that's explicitly announced how many posts it will be cutting. But we're actually likely to see worse scenarios in provinces like KZN, potentially even Gauteng. And so the point here is that encouraging or incentivizing teachers to retire early is not only the opposite of what is actually happening on the ground, where we're asking teachers, the department is asking teachers to come back from retirement, but it does nothing to address the massive shortfall that already exists.
And when it comes to this retirement development, and what does it say to the prioritization of education in this country?
Well, I think one thing that's particularly sad, in terms of what it says, is firstly is this implication that we have, somehow a bloated sector of teachers already, where teachers have been very explicit, crying out not only in the most recent budget cuts, but before then as well, and so have we as civil society, to say that teachers are already not respected enough. Teachers are already not given the safeguards that are necessary, whether it's in terms of post protection or the safety of teachers at school or on the way to school. The second thing that it says is that the state is not listening to what has been clearly indicated, which is that the reason for not having, as Treasury itself has referred to, new talent, for example, with younger teachers, is not because there's some nefarious group of older teachers who are holding on to jobs. It's because we're not sufficiently encouraging entry into the sector. One example is the cancellation or the significant cut of the Funza Lushaka bursary, which was, and for many teachers has been, a vital entry avenue towards teaching. In fact, the only primary form of bursary that remains, which itself is very confusing in terms of how it's been rolled out, but is funding for people to complete a one-year PGCE certificate. And for those who don't know, that in itself is very exclusionary. Because a PGCE requires you already to have an undergraduate degree. And so, if we're trying to encourage entry into the sector, particularly by young people, and particularly by young Black people and young Black women, we're doing the exact opposite by gatekeeping the sector and then throwing older teachers under the bus as if they're the reasons why we're not being able to encourage younger teachers.
Do you think that solutions can be found in terms of trying to address this scenario that we are faced with as a country, heading on to next year, and when we are expecting the Finance Minister to deliver the budget for 2025?
Well, yes, there's a couple of things. I suppose we could talk about it for quite a while, but to summarize, the first thing is, it's very important that we bear in mind that whether or not we were having this discussion about, early retirement schemes or post-provisioning cuts, all socioeconomic rights in South Africa are supposed to be ring-fenced. In other words, there's supposed to be a red line at which we say whether we're going to make budget cuts in certain areas of the budget, certain inefficiencies are going to be traded for others. When it comes to the protection of the most vulnerable, and this is something that Treasury at least nominally itself accepts in the MTBPS, we're not supposed to be throwing vulnerable people under the bus. And the reality is that stagnating funding for education and stagnating funding for health and social development is not protecting the most vulnerable, because it means that actually, compared to inflation, people are worse off each year than they were before. So the solution is firstly to understand that we do have sufficient capital, we do have sufficient funding to protect the most vulnerable meaningfully in a way that we're not. Secondly, to understand the opportunity cost of not protecting the vulnerable. It's not a situation where if we don't give children education now, if we don't give people healthcare now, we can defer that cost into the future. It's a cost we're currently incurring when we don't look after vulnerable people because of the ripple effect that has on our productivity, on our levels of violence, on our levels of social integration. And the third thing that I would really like to encourage Treasury to reconsider is that there doesn't have to be a zero-sum approach to austerity or to budget cuts or to fiscal responsibility. And exactly as I've just mentioned now, we not only have the sufficient capital, as has been indicated in the MTBPS's positive outlook for economic growth and for business productivity, but more importantly, I would say, we have a vested interest in making sure that our future is one where people are skilled, is one where people have the ability to earn incomes for themselves, and where people have the ability to look after their families. And that is only done by recognizing the value of socioeconomic rights as not just the protection of victims in society, but of an investment in our future. And right now, we're not sure that is the message that's being conveyed by Parliament or by Treasury itself.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for your time and for that insight. That is Daniel Al-Naddaf. He is from Equal Education, the Law Centre, talking to us there about that early retirement option that has been given to those in the education sector as well and public servants, and that is by the Finance Minister.